Hello and welcome in. My name's Tom, your neighborhood butcher. Have you ever been at the grocery store and wonder why, when you're looking at the meat counter, all that meat looks really red and beautiful? Have you ever been looking in the reduced section and wonder why, well, maybe it's not quite as red, it's a little bit brownish? Or have you ever been looking at that section in the meat case where all the different packs of meat are cryovac and why it has that purplish color? Have you ever wondered when you take that package of meat home and it's been shingled where you have a number of pieces of meat stacked on top of each other and you pull that piece of meat back and there's brown underneath that? We're going to explain that today. I'm going to talk about those different states when it comes to the science of why that happens. You know what? Let's get a little bit nerdy and let's talk about some science facts when we're discussing meat coloration and why meat turns red, brown, and purple. All right, let's get at it. So, as we sit at the meat counter and we see these beautiful ruby red packages of meat, what do you think causes that? Why is that meat red like that? In the muscle of that meat, there's a thing called myoglobin. Myoglobin is a protein that oxygen will bind with and it turns that ruby red. It's called oxymyoglobin. That's the term for that meat turning red, or that myoglobin binding with an oxygen that makes it nice and bright and red. It's a farce to think that when there's that reddish colored liquid in the bottom of your package, that's blood. It's never blood. It is myoglobin that's bound with oxygen to make it red, and then water. Animals are just like us, are 98% water. When they're processing the animal, they drain all the blood out of those muscles and out of the animal. So there's no blood left in there. It's a thing called myoglobin. And what makes it red is it binding with oxygen. For a long time, we've associated that real ruby red color with freshness. And this is true because no oxidation has happened to that myoglobin cell, and that meat has not downgraded. Oxygen is the killer to meat. Oxygen is what gives it life and gives it the color, and then oxygen is also what slowly oxidizes that piece of meat and downgrades it and allows bacteria to grow on that meat, which is what causes the oxidation. There's two more terms when you're dealing with meat colorations. So why, when you're looking at those cryovac pieces of meat, usually they're organic or they're like a store brand or one of the name brands and it's in the cryovac and it has that real purplish look to it? Well, that's called deoxymyoglobin. That means that the myoglobin cell has not bound with oxygen yet, so it has a purplish red look to it or a purplish brown look to it. Because sometimes there's a little bit of oxygen in that cryovac pack, you'll get what's called metmyoglobin, which is the oxidation of that myoglobin cell. Before all the oxygen is eaten out of that package, just a little bit of oxidation has taken hold on just the surface of that muscle. And that's why you see sometimes you'll see that brownish look on the top of those packages. Just a little bit. But most of the time, they take all the oxygen out of the package and has a nice purplish look. And this is what you want. If you take that meat, cut it open, leave it out on the counter for maybe 30 minutes, you'll notice that that meat will brighten up and it will become red as oxygen binds with that myoglobin cell. It's pretty amazing, honestly. There's been tricks that different retailers have used over the years, and it's been banned for quite some time. I know in Europe and a few other places across the world, they've banned introducing carbon monoxide to meat, carboxymyoglobin. And if you flash that piece of meat with carbon monoxide, it will just bind that oxygen to that myoglobin and it will keep that color and it will stay for a long time and it will also hide spoilage. A lot of retailers were using that process of basically gassing your meat with carbon monoxide and it would keep a nice bright color. But nowadays they don't do that. What they do is they keep meat in this state that will take all the oxygen out of that environment, so it'll be oxygenated to a state where it's that oxymyoglobin state where the oxygen is bound with the myoglobin, and then it almost freezes it in time, so to speak. So it gives it just enough oxygen to make it turn colors and turn that nice, beautiful ruby red color. And then all that oxygen is gone and it will just stay in that state for an extended period of time. And that's kind of how they preserve meat nowadays. So they use a deoxygenating pad that holds the stability of that environment once that meat is turned nice and ruby red. So, what happens when you get that shingled pack of meat and you pull up that piece of meat and underneath there is brown? That's that deoxymyoglobin. So, basically, oxygen has not had a chance to bind with that myoglobin cell because those two pieces of meat have created suction and no oxygen can get in there. If it's left for a long time like that, then you'll get into the metmyoglobin, where that cell will then become downgraded and oxidized. A lot of the times, if you pull that back, it'll have like a greenish hue to it, and that's where that oxidation is starting. When you pull that steak up that's been shingled and has that brown look, if you separate those pieces of meat and allow oxygen to get to that brown spot, it will turn red if it's nice and fresh. Within 30 minutes, usually, the color will come back. Not all the way, because some of the damage has been done, but it is not bad by any means. It's just been in an unoxygenated state while those two pieces have been together. And then when you pull it apart, the myoglobin will interact with oxygen and turn red. So, say you're trying to buy reduced meat. You're looking for that deal. Maybe you're trying to save a penny. You're trying to save a few dollars. Meat only has 3 or 4 days total of shelf life. It's a perishable product. They have to move it through the system every 3 to 4 days after it's been cut. So within 2 or 3 days, a meat market will reduce that piece of meat and put it in its reduced section. And this is that metmyoglobin. And it's the process of that meat turning brown. It's the oxidation of that myoglobin cell that breaks the meat down, and the spoilage allows bacteria to start growing and slowly eats and downgrades that piece of meat. It'll add the smell, the bad smell to it. It'll add like a tacky texture to it as that bacteria becomes more and more prevalent as that oxidation happens. So over in the reduced section, a lot of the times you'll see meat that's browning. Doesn't mean it's bad. If bacteria has had a chance to break down the outside of that meat, a lot of the times if you cut that, say, roaster steak open, you'll see that there's a nice pink layer in the middle. And you smell it, and there's no real, you just smell that irony kind of meat smell. That's a good piece of meat. There's nothing wrong with that. That meat can be browned like that. Mainly the odor. Your nose knows best. I can tell you that. If it has an odor, it is not going to taste good. Doesn't mean you can't eat it, because you can always cook the bacteria off of it, but it will have an odor to it. So you got to be careful when you're buying the browning meat that's in the reduced section. A lot of the times you can put your nose up to that package, because one thing that we don't realize is when we're looking at those white or black or yellow packages that are in the meat case that are overwrapped, that film, it's a porous film. It's made to breathe and allow that meat to have oxygen, so that oxymyoglobin process happens so that that meat stays nice and red until the point where it doesn't, and it starts working into the metmyoglobin process where it starts to be oxidized and downgrade. It's a pretty interesting process, and I just kind of want to bring to light what these terms are called, and then you understanding scientifically what's happening to that piece of meat so that you can make the best choice for you and your family. If you're in the reduced section and you're buying that piece of meat that, say, only has 1 day left of shelf life on it, it's only going to last maybe a couple days past that shelf life in your refrigerator unless you freeze it. Then you freeze the process, you freeze the bacteria growth, you freeze the oxidation process that's starting to happen, and then you'll have time to be able to cook that later on. But as you thaw that piece of meat out, that bacteria will start growing again. So you got to make sure you're buying something that still has a good smell to it, and is worth preserving. Because you got to understand, once you thaw it out, that bacteria process is going to start again, and it's going to give the chance for that meat to oxidize and downgrade more as you're thawing it out. But meat that's a couple days old, bacteria has had a chance to work on the graining of the meat, start to break down the meat. You're going to cook all that bacteria off as you cook that meat up to its 135, 145, 155 degrees. It's interesting when you're thinking about meat, say bison, cow, they have a very high rate of myoglobin, and that's why it's nice and red and has that darker color to it. When you're looking at, say, like pork has like an intermediate amount of myoglobin in it, and then like turkey and chicken have a very low amount of myoglobin in it. That myoglobin is what gives it the coloration as the oxygen interacts with that cell and binds. It's a pretty interesting process, and I was just trying to bring some light to it. My 30 years of experience as a butcher, I get these questions all the time, and I hope that I can bring some understanding to the science and then what you're seeing as you're trying to buy those packages of meat and find a good deal in the reduced section. If you see that piece of meat in the reduced section has that markdown tag on it, it's a little cheaper priced and it's still bright red, or it has a reddish color, maybe just a reddish brownish color, that's a good piece of meat. That's going to be a tender piece of meat because bacteria has had a bit of a chance to work on that stuff. Take it home, cook it. It'll be great. Anyway, I just wanted to explain the process of why meat goes from that ruby red to that brown to being bad. And then, how to help you make the best choice for you and your family. When you buy meat, meat's expensive, and it's worth knowing what's going on and why it's the color it is, when it is, and how it is. Hey, I hope I helped. Thank you for spending some time with me. Please like and subscribe. That's what makes it all go around. Thanks again. I'll see you next time. Bye now.